Hello and welcome to the third of our classic races in the Cycling Ireland Zwift series of online racing action. We're in New York on the 6 train circuit this morning for 5 laps and 32 kilometres of racing and 305 metres of climbing. And it's a handicap race this morning. Group D will depart shortly, followed at appropriate intervals in turn by Groups C, B and A. But first, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined once again by the man of the moment, Ronan McLaughlin of cyclingtips.com, who dropped the microphone in favour of the Turbo last Saturday for a perfect return to the Cycling Ireland Zwift racing series. Ronan, thanks for joining us again. And well, you certainly took advantage of your morning free of media duties to get back racing on Zwift. And what a demonstration of how to put a Zwift race together that you gave us. You had a nice scrap with Richard Barry, but eventually you rode away to cross the line first in the A category. Talk us through the experience.
Yeah, it went fairly well. We sort of found out fairly late that the commentary or the live coverage wasn't happening last weekend, so I just took the opportunity to, as you say, hop on Zwift and hop into the race there. And I'd sort of been watching it week after week for the last few months, and had that sort of competitive urge to that having sat back and watched so much racing, I just wanted to get stuck into it. So yeah, the opportunity presented itself, and I just very much spur of the moment thing at the last minute, and it worked out all right. I think I had a bit of a maybe you might call it an unfair advantage in some ways, that having watched so many of the riders so often on Zwift and commentated on their racing, I sort of had a good idea of each individual's tactics and how they might race and how the final of the race might pan out. And it certainly went well. I suppose I can't complain with a win.
So close analysis and observation of the races in a passive sense it really works. It really helps.
I think the last Cycling Ireland Zwift race that I did was the first of the Cycling Ireland Zwift League races way back last March or April. And I think I probably approached that race with a very different tactical plan than I did on Saturday past. And that's just, having spent a year watching the race and seeing what tactics seem to result in success, and just knowing the sort of the approach to Zwift racing that you need to take. Certainly have picked up a lot from that. And it's I think initially everybody sets out on Zwift racing trying to replicate road racing, and what the Cycling Ireland Zwift League commentating role has given me is a sort of an insight into the fact that it's not a replication of road racing. It's a discipline of itself, and you need to change your tactics, change your approach, sort of maybe put yourself outside of your comfort zone, and certainly it's an exciting form of racing, and just it brings out different characteristics in the riders, and that's why we see some riders really come into their own on the indoor platforms.
Well, you certainly put everyone else outside of their comfort zone. Well done on that one. A great win for Ronan among the A men, with Richard Barry second and Conor Verbruggen third. Limerick CC's Brian Nolan won the Battle of the Bees from Alan Concannon and Edwin Sutton. Ronan Bracken from Lakeside CC won Class C from Mark Harewood and Andy Flood, while Kieran McGowan headed Class D from Donal Galvin and Michael Leahy. In the women's race, Heather Foley had it very much to herself throughout, leading Claire Richardson home, with Kate Devon and Suzanne Windsor prevailing in Class C, and full results are available on cyclingireland.ie. Well, eagle-eyed followers of Cycling Ireland Zwift racing will have spotted a familiar name among the Group D riders in last Saturday's scratch race, none other than 1987 Tour de France, Giro d'Italia and World Road Race Championship winner Stephen Roche was keeping some friends company, as he explained to me when we caught up for a chat about that and other matters in the world of cycling.
Actually, very strange, because Patrick Valke, who was my long-time friend, and he was first of all a mechanic back in 1980-81 when I went pro. Then he followed me to Laradute in 84. Then he followed me to Carrera in 86-87. He was very, very prominent in the goings on in the Giro of 87. We've been keeping in touch, of course, regularly. So then he called me up and said, "Hey, we're joining Cycling Ireland on Saturday." Cycling Ireland, wow! That's why Cycling Ireland. That's nothing to do with kind of French cycling or anything else. He says, "No. They got a super ride on on Saturday. We did it last weekend. So we're doing it again this weekend, about 5 or 6 of us. We started off together, and en route we picked up one of my ex-mechanics, Eric Rousset. So we rode together, and Eric, of course, is riding a lot better than Patrick. And I rode myself, but I waited for Patrick towards the end. But he said he was just totally empty, couldn't finish. It was too hard for him. It was good fun.
It's a tonic, isn't it? It's just great to have this outlet, and I mean, it's wonderful that Cycling Ireland are putting together these races. But some sort of a stimulating outlet of this nature has just been great for everyone in lockdown.
It has, but me and I basically took it up during the big confinement back in March, April of last year, and I couldn't go anywhere. So I set myself up, and I set myself a target to ride, but also to lose weight. I put on a bit of weight, so I wanted to lose weight. So I started off with that in mind. I was doing the first day I did like 15, 20 minutes. And after a couple of days, I was building it up a little bit. And I was finally doing, about, an hour and a half, and got better and better. And the craziest thing about it was I lost in all about over 3 months, nearly 10 kilos. But I had 10 kilos to lose. And but most of them, surprisingly enough, I went on the road then in May when the lockdown, when we came out of lockdown, and I was incredibly surprised with the level of fitness I had. I was going out with some friends who were reasonably good levels, even the climbing. I was, riding extremely well. And I never would have thought that I could have gained such fitness by riding an indoor trainer.
Yeah, it's a big knowledge thing, isn't it, for riders, that it doesn't have to be huge volume to get the gains and get that. Yeah.
Exactly. But the amazing thing is, I can say, hey, Deco, what are you doing at 7 o'clock tonight? I'll meet up with you in Watopia, or meet you up in Innsbruck, or meet up in Richmond Park, or meet you up whatever, and we can have a ride together and actually have a little fight even. We haven't got to kind of stay together. We can actually, can have actual competition between us. It's an incredible system.
And you can see the full interview with Stephen on the Cycling Ireland Facebook page, and that's available through other social outlets. Now, Ronan, the handicap format proved very popular 2 weeks ago, and the handicappers did a really amazing job. What are the challenges for the riders today?
Yeah, it was certainly exciting racing. I think if we think back, the Ds were just caught coming into, or even within the final kilometre, and it really made for an exciting finish. We were all on the edge of our seats. Nobody quite knew which way it was going to work out, and that's exactly what you want to see when you tune in to watch some racing, whether it be in real life or on Zwift or whatever sport. Even you want to see good close competition, and hopefully we'll see more of the same today. Today's course is the 6 train, which I think it's one of the shortest laps within the New York City world on Zwift, and we've got 5 laps of it today. It's not overly challenging, the lap. There's only, I think, roughly 60 meters of climbing per lap, so it's not by no means a hilly race. It's actually quite flat. We've got I think it's 32 kilometers of racing in total, so it should be a good opportunity for the groups to really get together and work well as a group, trying to hold off the chasers behind them or try to catch the group in front. And I think we could see a similar scenario as we've seen in the first of these chase races, where it's very, very close coming into the final few kilometers, and it really could go either way, just depending on which groups can really function well together and share the workload and keep their pace as high as possible. It's there's no one rider that's going to catch everybody in front of them, or no one rider that can hold off a chasing bunch behind on their own. It really is it's really about these riders who are usually racing against each other, competitors, and this week they have to get together and work as a team, so to speak, and hopefully that'll result in some really good racing.
Team racing for a while at least. Well, we're just about to get going. The Group D riders are on the start line. Let's see who's up for the fight this morning. We're underway and well underway. 5 kilometres into this third round of the Cycling Ireland Zwift series of classic events, and the D riders are well underway. They've got the advantage out front. They're going to try and make the most of it. Just to give you a sense of what's involved for the riders today: 5 laps, 6.4 kilometres per lap, so it's coming up just over 32 kilometres of racing today. The D group have a total of 10 minutes on the A's, who will be last off and into action very shortly. We'll see the A's into action, and they've got to make up 10 minutes to catch the leaders out front. The D's have an advantage of 6 minutes on Group C. They have 9 minutes on Group B and 10 minutes on Group A. So we will remind you of those gaps and keep you informed as to what's happening. It's Michael Garland, visitor from Scotland, who's up front at the moment. Joe Burney is leading the group as well, and the Group D's are working well together. They've jettisoned 1 or 2 riders. They've brought 1 or 2 top stars with them. I'm just looking for a significant name that we spotted off the start line a little earlier on. It was indeed Stephen Roach, 1987 Tour de France winner, is in the group again today, along with his longtime friend, former mechanic and indeed director sportive of various teams that he was involved in back in the 1980s. Patrick Valka is also in there. Watch out for the likes of Stephen O'Shea, who's made the group today as well. I think we might have a camera for Stephen, former winner of many races back in the 80s and 90s. Fast galloper, he's pretty good on a rolling course, and that's what they've got here today. It's all about cooperation, Ronan, and of the D's, and they're now trying to work together to maintain their lead.
Yeah, it's all about that cooperation amongst the group today, and we can see this D group splitting up significantly already, and that perhaps it's just the strongest riders coming to the fore, but over the course of a race of 30 odd kilometers, it's going to be about which group can work best together and sustain their high tempo to try and stave off the chasers coming behind. So yeah, it should make for some interesting racing today, and we see the gaps. The gaps between the groups are actually the same as the last chase race that we had 2 weeks ago, but the course is obviously 5 kilometers or 6 kilometers shorter than it was 2 weeks ago. So we've seen how it played out. It was so close to the finish the last time that the front D's eventually got caught. Will the shorter distance this week give them a better chance of surviving, or will this slightly more challenging course mean that they still get sort of caught just before the finish line? It'll be interesting to see.
This is the C group on the road. They are the second group into action today, trying to close down a margin of 6 minutes to the leaders up front. This is, we just got a shot of Katie Devon from Galway Bay Cycling Club. She was the leading C competitor amongst the women in last week's second round of this classic series of one-day events. There are 5 in total. Then we're back to league action after that. But these CPs, these handicaps, these Australian handicaps, call them what you will, they have proved very popular. The first of them was the first round of the series, and all came down to just inside the final kilometre. The leaders, who'd been out front from the very start, the leading D competitors, were just about overhauled by Richard Barry and friends, and it was pretty nip and tuck all the way to the line from there. But it was, I think, Barry that got the win on that occasion. But what about a fantastic performance last week from Ronan McLaughlin, and Richard Barry, I think, is thrilled that Ronan is on mic today. We're looking at the B group, who are also now into action. 9 minutes behind the D's in starting today, but just with a single minute advantage over the A's. And it took the A's a long time to catch the leading B's when we watched them a couple of weeks ago, Ronan.
Yeah, it sure did. Those two groups were very equally matched on the road. The last day we had this style of race, so it'll be interesting to see, will it be the same sort of case today, or will they come together a bit quicker? I think perhaps if they had come together slightly quicker the last day, they might have caught those front D's a bit earlier, and that would have given a chance for a bit more racing coming in towards the finish. Whereas the way it ended up the last time, we just seen sort of a massed bunch sprint coming in the last kilometre, and I think it was actually Nathan Keown from Team Dan Morrissey who took the win that day. So 2 second places in a row for Richard Barry. I'm sure he'll be out today to try and take top spot.
And this is, we're looking at the A group actually out front now, and there's just a couple of riders look like they've detached themselves from the rest. No surprise, it's Richard Barry's trying to race across this single minute disadvantage. That's what the leading B riders have over the leading A's, and it is a rolling course, and for all that we're describing this as relatively unchallenging, that doesn't mean that it's not without its challenges. And Richard Barry is out of the saddle in his pain cave, trying to push on to make it across the gap to the to those Bs up front. And we saw that this was a tactic that he employed a couple of weeks ago. Richard Barry was with the A's for quite a while and then decided he'd take his leave of the A's and see if he couldn't make it across to the Bs on his own. It looks as if he's trying something similar today.
Yeah, it's a brave move very early into the race. He's maybe trying to catch that front group off guard before they really get together and start cooperating as a single sort of unit and keeping their speed a lot higher. Richard seems to be trying to make the junction across here right from the start, and it'll be interesting to see now whether this pays off or not. If it doesn't, Richard Barry could find himself in a very difficult position, stuck between two groups and really wasting quite a lot of energy. But should this tactic work out for him, he could find himself in pole position today.
Yeah, Lindsay Watson among those riders that want to keep Richard Barry in check. They don't want to let him get any sort of an advantage. They know what a threat the man from Cork is, and Lindsay Watson will be someone to watch out for should it come down to a sprint later on, as we pick up on Watson and his efforts to get on terms with the rest. I can tell you the leaders up front are continuing to try and press home their advantage. We've lost Stephen Roach from the leading group, and I suspect that was a Wi-Fi dropout because he was running at the front of that D group for quite a while. He's also, and he was keen to emphasize this, for him it's a social ride. He's out riding with his friends Patrick Valka, and they have another friend, former mechanic of his as well, Eric Rousset, who's also involved. I'm trying to look for Eric's name, but Stephen Roach has dropped back a little bit, so he's now 2 minutes behind. Is that, or was that a Wi-Fi dropout, or was it just a case that he wanted to go and play with his friends and is less concerned about going for the win? But when he was there, he was making a useful contribution to the advantage of the leading D riders up front. We've got Francois Brunard, who's a rider from France. Michael Garland is a Scot. We've got some Australian riders, other British riders. Emily Wilkins is in there. Shannon Syme as well. So leading women riders in amongst the men. Of course, this is about ability level, ability standard based on watts per kilo, and they haven't split up the men from the women in this one. So it's an opportunity for women to race with the men. Some other names to conjure with. Patrick Valka, I can tell you, still in that leading group of Ds. The former Fagor director sportif once upon a time, the man who famously slept with Stephen Roach's bike to prevent any shenanigans at the Giro d'Italia back in 1987. Plenty of stories came out of that bike race, didn't they? They're still talking about it, but Patrick Valka was his trusted mechanic looking after him. Let's look at the numbers coming back from Joe Burney at the moment, and it's 3.5 watts per kilo from the leading D riders. They're really having to get it out here, and it's as we can't say it often enough, Ronan, but this is a rolling up and down course. It might be the flattest one in New York, but that doesn't mean it's flat.
No, it's certainly, it's I suppose relatively flat when you look at it in terms of total elevation for today's race, but it's almost it's one of those sort of really grippy courses that it's constantly up and down, and it's really hard to get a rhythm on. And we've seen riders struggling with that right from the off today. We've seen much bigger splits in these groups than we've seen in London 2 weeks ago. So certainly that sort of rolling nature of the course today is playing a part in what we're seeing on our screens here.
Stephen O'Shea is in the pain cave. We might have a camera from Stephen. I know he's dialed in on Zoom, and he's in that leading group, working well, coordinating well. As I say, he was a fast galloper back he had a birthday last week, actually. He posted on Facebook a glorious success of his on a stage in Wexford Town, back in the Wexford 2 Day in, I think, around about 1990, but he wouldn't care for me to remind you of the year. But it was superb coverage from Peter Purfield back then. And there you have it, Stephen O'Shea's. And he looks as if he's turning the pedals well. He's focusing hard and putting out 260, 270 watts in control of his effort, but 166 beats per minute would suggest that it's no easy effort that he's making. He's definitely having to work for this one, but he's in control. He's on the wheel of Patrick Valk at the moment and others in this group. Donald Galvin also has made it into this group. Rachel McLaughlin, no relation to any of our commentary crew here today, as far as I know, but she's safely in the leading D group up front at the moment.
No relation though, as far as I know, anyway.
Yeah, there'll be question marks about who's looking after Sophia at the moment. If in that case, yeah. We're looking at the C group as we pick up the chasers. Quick reminder: they've 6 minutes to make up, so it's quite a difference, isn't it? Quite a delta to the leading group up front. And a reminder as well that they had 4 minutes on the best of the A's. A lot of riders employing the featherweight here suggests and reminds us that it is a little bit of a grippy section here. And if you've got that power up, then why not use it? Gives you 15 seconds of reducing the weight, so you just dance up those hills with relative ease. It's anything but for David Gaffney, who's just trying to measure his effort nicely, and you see that his heart rate is up at numbers that most people would be close to the threshold for most people, I think, or close to the maximum indeed, as he's charging along in the wake of the rest of the C competitors. Van der Kerkhoven is in there. He's probably a good soccer player as well. And Bracken as well, I believe, is one of our leading C competitors. That looks like Ronan Bracken from Lakeside Wheelers, the Mullingar Cycling Club. And Ronan McLaughlin Ronan Bracken, I should say, was the leading C competitor 1 week ago. So the A's, we understand now, are fully 4.4 kilometers behind the leading riders. We're now looking at the leading B competitors. That's Quintana, perhaps a different Quintana. Dylan Rafter is up at the front of that. Another man who is a very accomplished rider on the road. Many years standing. He's won lots and lots of big quality bike races in Ireland at A category level. Won the Gorey 3-Day as well a few years ago. And Dylan Rafter is just the sort of legs, just the sort of understanding of how to ride in a group that you want to try and hold off the A's behind and try and close down the margin to the leaders up front. Last time we heard, between the leading D riders and the leading A riders, just over 4 kilometers. Here's the A's now, Ronan.
Yeah, and it seems like Richard Barry and Lindsay Watson have been reabsorbed by the A group behind, so it'll be interesting now, just as we sit with this group for a while, to see how well they are working together and to see what kind of cooperation there is in this group. But I think it's although it would have been interesting to see Richard Barry and Lindsay Watson maybe attack from the start and see if they could get across to these groups in front of them. That would have really put the cat amongst the pigeons, as they say, for the other A's. Could they cooperate well together? And it appears that they have, because they've brought them back, as we see Richard Barry now launching another attack on this drag up around this corner here.
Well, he's not hanging around, and we talk about this being effectively an ad hoc team event where riders, despite the fact they're wearing different jerseys, different affiliations, and they're racing for their own interests, need to cooperate, collaborate, and form an alliance on the road in order to close down those groups up front who are also working in collaboration with each other. Well, this is not exactly with the script, is it? Because Richard Barry charging through some of those dropped riders from the Bs. He's hoovering them up left, right and centre. But the leading B riders still have an advantage. The margin off the start line, I will remind you, just a single minute. But how close is he to infiltrating the leading A's? He's now just 400 metres behind the leading B rider. So he's got 400 metres to make up to get to the front of that B group. Looks like he's going to get there. The question is, will he be on his own when he does it?
Yeah, he's putting in a huge effort here so early in the race, and it's we certainly have to pay close attention to whether or not this tactic works out for Richard Barry today. A lot of watts been expended here, a lot of energy been expended, and when it gets across these leading Bs, it'll really depend then on how well this new group can work together. We're seeing the other riders in the A group behind having to respond to this attack, but you'd have to question somewhat, would they be better to sort of cooperate a bit better together in these early stages of the race and save this sort of attacking action for later in the event, where they can really punch on and trying to go for the win rather than try to distance each other at this early stage, which is more likely to just, I suppose, fatigue the whole A group and damage everybody's chances of catching the leading Ds.
So we're looking at the leading B group now. It's Stephen Edmondson well to the fore. He is a strong rider of some great standing. Indeed, he's produced a string of quality results, and indeed Stephen Edmondson has been a leading competitor in the leagues as well. I do believe he won the B League, or maybe I have that one slightly a kilter. He was well to the fore though, and he, in the company of others, it says Walkingshaw, Fitzgerald, Quintana, perhaps a different one, Fagan. We did actually, one of the riders that we saw entered on the line today in the B group was a certain Frank Schleck from Luxembourg, whose vital statistics pretty much closely matched, and indeed were identical to, it was probably closer to the truth, a certain former Tour de France stage winner from Luxembourg. So I wonder if Frank Schleck has actually made it onto the start line. We'll see. He certainly was entered in the event beforehand, so we keep an eye out to see does his avatar appear and whether he's involved in the action. Lindsay Watson in the centre of that A group. They're huddled closely together. They're far apart in reality, but in this virtual reality, Lindsay Watson safely in that group with the likes of Jason Henry as well, another name to conjure with, who's Eddie Brennan there from Dublin, who's also up front, with Watson putting out close to 300 watts consistently, but managing to just save little bits of energy here and there as more of those Bs, and indeed one or two Cs probably in there as well at this point, are being hoovered up by those leading A riders. Watson and co are playing this one intelligently as we pick up on the this is another view of that A group. Richard Barry nestling in that group now, so that attack being neutralized once more. So Barry has been retained. He's going to have to do it in the company of others. 300 meters behind.
Yeah,
B
certainly,
now.
and the as I was sort of mentioning there earlier, this group really needs to sort of find a way to work together. It's not a natural thing to be doing with the riders that you're usually competing against for the win, but at this early stage of a race such as this type here, it's really the cooperation of the group working well together that can close down these gaps that we see to the groups in front. And the gaps are by no means insignificant. Like, it's still it was 10 minutes on the start line to the leading Ds, and we've seen how well the leading Ds are working well together. So if these A's want to give themselves a chance of taking the victory today, they're really going to have to get cooperating well together and sharing the pace on the front of the group, and that way they can quicker close down this gap and give themselves a better chance of actually being able to race on the last lap, rather than just giving everything to pull in the remaining leaders.
Emily Wilkins among those riders up front. This is the leading D group. There are about 7 riders who are working well together. Michael Garland, the Scottish visitor, is amongst those number, as indeed is Joe Burney, who hits the front now to take his turn on the front and make that contribution. Donald Galvin, Dirk Adrichem, Irish registered rider. Francois Brunner is a French visitor. We've got Dutchman Ron Dingemans. Shannon Syme from Australia, I do believe. Just trying to see the flag. You wouldn't want to make a mistake between an Australian and a New Zealand flag, but I don't see any sign of any little red stars on that one, so we believe it's a rider from the Southern Hemisphere, and likely riding for Australia's Shannon Syme. Donald Galvin we've mentioned, and those are pretty much the leading riders. And it's indeed a narrow advantage, just 5 or 6 riders that have that lead up front. They're working well, but they need to work well, and they need to stay cooperated. And we were chatting beforehand, Ronan, and often with with those limit groups, they're given a significant advantage, but sometimes there's a lack of experience and there isn't always cooperation and understanding. However, we've got a lot of very experienced riders in there who'll be shouting at the others, telling them what to do. They'll be shouting last man as they're going through.
Yeah, possibly on Discord or something. They maybe have a plan in place here from before the race. But yeah, there's certainly some very experienced riders in this front D group, and it's perhaps the group that we've seen working best together. They've been sharing the work on the front of the group well together. They've been taking turns. Every rider here seems to be taking an honest amount of turns on the front, and that's what's contributing to their sort of sustained pace that we see here. And we've seen this in the first chase race as well, where the leading Ds were working very, very well together. There was no attacking, or there was no nobody's sitting on the back of the group. It seemed to be a very honest effort from everybody in the group, and that's why ultimately they got caught just before the finish line, but they came so close on that occasion, and I'm sure that's given them motivation to sort of try the same again this week. Everybody work together in the group and see how far they can get, or how close they can get to the finish.
Meanwhile, the C group, who started the day with an advantage of 4 minutes on the A group behind, but with 6 minutes to make up to get on terms with the leading riders, including Gaffney and that group of C riders. He's pressing hard on the pedals. It's effective stuff. 3.8, getting up towards 4 watts per kilo on occasion on this rolling course, trying to keep the momentum up over the drags and then try and find a moment to recover after rolling through to the front. So it's now 2.3 kilometers is the margin between the group you're looking at right now. That's the C group and the front of the bike race. So that's it's a fair bit. And a quick reminder as well, 33 they had in a race that was 6 kilometers longer 2 weeks ago. That would suggest that our D riders have a shot today.
It would, yeah, but then if we factor in the sort of more challenging terrain that the riders are facing today, we don't have any big mountains, as we've said a couple of times already, but it is constantly up and down, and that will have an effect. In London 2 weeks ago, with it being so flat, we've seen incredibly high speeds from start to finish, and those high speeds make it more difficult to close down gaps. Whereas today we do have a number of drags on the lap each time, and that that is sapping the energy of the riders, and it gives the strong riders or the stronger riders an opportunity or a real launch pad to sort of put in big efforts and really take chunks of time out of the groups that they're chasing.
I can tell you, Stephen Roach is showing as 8th on the road at the moment, but as we understand it, not in this group. So there's a little bit of a confusion between the time gaps that we're getting. But Stephen Roach in the company of Patrick Valka and riding on, and great to have him with us. And it was great to chat to Stephen during the week, actually. We had a long conversation about all things cycling, whether the competition and the performances of the leading competitors in men's World Tour racing. He had some interesting observations to make about not just his son Nicholas, but also Sam Bennett. We had Dan Martin, Eddie Dunbar, and Ryan Mullen. Great to hear those contributions from Stephen Roach, and also some interesting observations as well about road cycling and the experience of cycling in general. Worth catching up on that one on Facebook. And Roach is riding on at the moment. Meanwhile, we're checking out the B group out there at the moment, including Dylan Rafter, who made his appearance on the front, albeit briefly, but he is a fine rider. Fitzgerald in there as well, and plenty of other invitation riders as well. This B group is, I think, very shortly going to be overhauled by the A's, but it's a similar pattern to that which prevailed in the first week of this CP racing, in as much as it took the A's a long time to get to the B's. There really is very little to choose between in terms of standard and ability between B's and A's. Yeah,
certainly. We're seeing a quite an even match here again. The gap on the start line wasn't huge, and on paper you would expect it to be closed down a lot sooner, but we can just see when these groups get together, the combined strength of the riders in each of the groups is very, very similar, and we likely will see the A's join up with the Bs in a quite soon here, but it'll be interesting to see then whether or not that extra large group of combined A's and Bs can really work well together and ramp the speed right up and reel in these riders from the C and D groups who are still out in front and still working well together.
Last time we heard, of course, the A's had fully 4 kilometres to make up on the leading riders up front. That's surely a little bit less, but it's going to be something in the order of 22 kilometres of racing completed by the leading riders up front, and about 18 and a half kilometres from the riders. Well, you might call them the pre-event favourites, or the stars of online Zwift racing, who are trying to get on terms with those leaders up front. The gaps between the groups, well, again, the last time we heard, the Bs had an advantage, the leading Bs at any rate, had an advantage of 300 metres over those A's. Now, that was a few minutes ago, so we're going to try and find out exactly now what the gap is between the Bs and the A's. I can tell you that the gap between the A's and the leading D riders is down to 3 kilometres. So within the last 7 minutes, they've actually closed by fully a kilometre. So it's a significant rate of capture. But are they going to get there in time?
That's the question. They're no doubt reeling them in, but are they just going to run out of road here before they can catch them? And will they find themselves on the finish line sprinting for the sort of runners-up prizes if the D's manage to stay away here?
Claire Richardson in this group is pressing on, one of the leading women riders in this event. Other names to conjure with amongst the women. We saw Katie Devon a little earlier on, who's performing with great distinction, and we've mentioned the likes of Emily Wilkins up front in the leading D group, who's doing a very, very impressive job to be in amongst those leaders. And it looks like it's a fairly decent, compact group of Bs that are working well to try and hold off the A's behind and doing a solid job at the moment. There's the gap between them. Still 300 metres between the leading A's and the leading Bs. You just saw it, 19.4 against 19.7. They go to 19.5. So I think it's probably fair to say you've got somewhere in the order of between 250 to 300 metres between the top A riders and the top Bs. So still a margin to make up. And it's often the pattern, isn't it, that there's no real significant gain between Bs and A's for quite a long while. And then suddenly, as the race goes into its end phase and the legs start to wilt a little bit and the lactic really starts to rise, that's when the A's are able to ram home their advantage.
Yeah, and it's almost a case of, where does the elastic snap, and in London 2 weeks ago we've seen the Bs held off for such a long time, and then we've seen Richard Barry make the solo move to get across to the Bs, and no sooner had he got across, but all of a sudden all of the A's had closed that gap. So we might see a similar scenario play out today, in that within the next lap or so, one of the A's makes a huge effort to try and go across solo, and then that really brings or sparks the rest of the A group into action as well, and we see them really ramp up the pace. And what we'll likely see then is this that high pace sustained all the way to the finish, and that was eventually what drew in the C's and the D's in the previous round as well. So I expect that we'll see something very similar happen here today.
Leading A riders, including Richard Barry, Lindsay Watson, in there working well. As we pick up the C group, which had a margin of 6 minutes to make up at the beginning of this event, and the C's are trying to get on terms. Have they made it up front? As we're checking out the likes of Emily Wilkins. This is the D group indeed. We're picking up on the D group. Got a couple of C names at the front, so I don't think C's have actually overhauled the D's just yet, so I'm not sure what the graphic is showing us on the right hand side, but suffice it to say we are looking at the front of the race. These are the leaders in this third round of the Cycling Ireland Classic League Series. 32.2 kilometres in total. Joe Burney is at the head of affairs, as he has been since the start of this race, in the company of Frenchman Francois Brunard, Michael Garland from Scotland is in there, Shannon Syme and others. Emily Wilkins, we've already mentioned, is pressing on with great impressive ability. Kaku is a C-registered Japanese visitor. This group is working well, but are they working well enough to hold off the rest?
Well, they're inside the final, well inside the final 10 kilometers here now, so they're putting themselves in a very good position with a strong chance of holding off. As we see yet another attack here from Richard Barry on the same short climb as we've seen it on the one of the previous laps, and Lindsay Watson very quickly onto his wheel this time, sort of aware now of the moves that Richard Barry might be about to place, and it seems he was quick to react to that one.
So it's continued and sustained attacks from Richard Barry. He is just attack. He knows only one way. It's fabulous stuff. It's hugely entertaining. And Richard Barry knows that he really needs to detach himself from those other riders, because while he has got a really fast turn of pace, he doesn't see himself as being a specialist sprinter. So this he's trying to make use of every little undulation that is offered by this course. And every time the road goes up, he's up for fun.
Yeah, and we see a full 2 kilometers here between Richard Barry and the A group and the leading D's on the right there, and that's a big ask of any person to ride across solo. So he's going to need to bring in a couple of these other A's who are sort of up for the fight with them to work together and reel in these leading D riders.
Well, it's fantastic to see those images, isn't it? And great to get that comparison of course they are going up and down at different rates, and it looks as if Barry has been at different parts of the circuit. So while the D's might be going up, the A's are going down. But suffice it to say, it is significant, the difference in terms of their rate along the virtual tarmac. And has that Richard Barry been overhauled by one or two other A riders, or are these riders that are just trying to stay with them as they've been hoovered up? I think it's probably the former. It looks as if this could be a very useful little alliance. Lindsay Watson in there, McLean from Ard Cycling Club also to the fore. So a couple of Ulstermen and a Munsterman who are up front and chasing and riding away from the A riders and trying to ride across that gap up to the D's up front, which is not going to be that easy. Here's A and B down to 100 metres between Richard Barry, Lindsay Watson and McLean from our cycling club in their efforts to overhaul that B group. And as they come up through the B's, Ronan, you would imagine that they would get an aerodynamic advantage, but not always the case.
Not always the case, yeah. Sometimes you can be unlucky and sort of get, rather than getting a slipstream off a rider, you can sort of get stuck on their slightly slower speed and then need to re-accelerate again, which is sort of the worst case scenario when you're mid-attack, you're at full effort, and all of a sudden your speed drops that little bit and you have to ramp it up again with another sprint. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see here now. Richard Barry, Lindsay Watson, Jason Kennedy there, and a couple of other riders have pressed on. They've opened up a gap of about 6 seconds, and this could be a make or break moment here, and that if that gap continues to open 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds and then grows out even further, that could be a strong A group, who have broken clear of the rest of the A's and will be motivated to work well together. Whereas if the other A's can close down this gap to the few breakaway riders, you could see a massive stall in the A group, and it could be the end of their race for the win today.
So as the gap between them, it's down to just fractions, less than 100 metres between the leading A riders and those leading Bs. They've managed to jettison all of the dead wood from that B group, and you've got the very strongest athletes, and the riders are on the best form in that B group, but they're not going to be able to overhaul or hold off, indeed. Richard Barry, McLean, Watson, Kenny in there as well. Looks like it's starting to knit itself back together a little bit between those riders. Have we got 4 up front now, indeed. Barry, McLean, Kenny and Watson are your 4 A riders. Barry is working hard for this one, but he knows how to ride in the group, and he knows when to make the effort and how to measure the effort, and he's on fine form. The teacher from Cork, who's racing for glory today. And the
And we
split
can
screen
just
has
see this
been
gap just slightly stretching out a bit to the other chasing A's. It's going 6, 7, 8 seconds, 9 seconds. So they are extending their lead slowly but surely here, and the pace is certainly hotting up here now. They're at 5, 6, 6.5 watts per kilo constantly. So expect to see these gaps to the group in front dwindle quite quickly.
Yeah, Conor Verbruggen among those riders who are now finding themselves in the unloved position of watching the gap starting to extend. I tell you what, every second gained it doesn't sound like much, but there's so much effort and intensity going in from every rider, almost a time trial for every rider in this event. So you know that those riders are starting to get that sinking feeling a little bit. So the likes of Conor Verbruggen, who's top 3 competitor, he was last week and he will be again, I'm quite sure, but he'll be a little bit anxious, a little bit concerned, as Patrick Corbally showing is well up towards the 4. If he is, that's impressive work being done by the Orwell Wheelers rider. Lindsay Watson, McLean, Barry, Kenny, those are the riders to conjure with, but the gaps between those leading 4 riders from the A group and the others up to 8 seconds, and the rest, as now we get a side of the gap between the other A's and the leading A's, and it's getting up around about 300 metres, 250, 300 metres.
Yeah, and as we're seeing, that translates to 7 or 8 seconds there on the road on the last glimpse we got of the actual time gaps. But, you know, if we think for a second that we're seeing basically a drag race here between some of the best A's in this group, with the 2 groups chasing each other, the speeds must be incredibly high, because these A riders are riding on their limit here at the moment, and I think that's going to mean that the next time we get a time gap to the groups in front, it's going to be significantly less than the last time gap that we got.
So we're looking at the leading A riders. It'd be nice to know exactly what's happening at the front of the race. We'll try and get in touch with what's happening amongst those leading D riders, as this little group of 4 strongest riders out there, and it's down to, look at that, less than a kilometre, down to about 900 metres between our leading D stroke C group up front, and there is a combination now, cooperation between C's and D's. Joe Burney is up there, as he has been throughout, and hang on, and it's a grippy little section. It's not that easy. Their legs are gonna be feeling the pinch now, down to the final 4 kilometres of racing for those riders. But the gap between the front of the race and those A's behind is really starting to shrink. You know what, at the start of this event, Ronan, we were thinking it was so much shorter than the handicap race 2 weeks ago. To have exactly the same time gap seemed like, well, it was going to be a big opportunity for the Ds. But now it's starting to look as if those little undulations in this circuit, in comparison to the one they used in London 2 weeks ago, are really having a radical effect on the time gaps.
Yeah, I'm sure there was riders standing on the start line arguing with the commissaires today. This gap's far too big. Let us go. But, you know, as we're seeing now on our screens, it has come down rapidly in the last lap, and it looks like it might have been just time to perfection again by the judges setting the gaps between the groups, and time to perfection arguably by the A's as well, if they do make this junction within this final lap now.
Ronan Fox is out there pressing on. Man from Eagle Road Club. Once upon a time, I think he might be the only member. I'm not sure how many members they've got, but he's involved, of course, with Ross Naman. He's on the committee of Ireland's leading international stage race, which is set to take place again in September. Ronan Fox is part of the organising committee for that, and he's also keen racer in the Cycling Ireland Zwift series. He's involved today. So we look at the front of the race, which is now, well, it's about 600 metres between them, and I think it's going to be really tough for those riders up front to hold them off, but that's not going to stop them from continuing to try. We've got Brunner, Shannon Syme and others up front, but it's been an impressive effort, but they really need more than 3-4 watts per kilo at the moment. Well, 3 and a bit watts per kilo in order to hold them off. It's going to be a very difficult ask.
Yeah, it certainly will. But, you know, we if we think back as well, we have seen the A, B's and C groups split up quite a lot on this challenging race today, and the leading D riders here will still be in contention for a top result today. Certainly top 20 will still be achievable, just depending on exactly where they are caught. But we're inside the final 3 kilometers or so now. They're still working well together in this D group, and they still have a chance of coming away with a high result. But it certainly looks like Richard Barry and Lindsay Watson and the other leading A's who have broke away here are about to make contact with them.
About 600 metres now between the front of the race and the big name chargers behind, who include Lindsay Watson of Ulster. So just to give you a sense, according to our data, we've got Richard Barry sitting among the top 9 riders in this event. So many of the riders now have been jettisoned and left to their own devices, and it's down to a select group of riders up front, chased by a select group of A and B riders behind. We've got up front Francois Brunard, the visiting rider from France, Shannon Syme, Michael Garland, Emily Wilkins, Dirk Adrichem is there as well, Joe Burney we've seen, and Kai Mettel from Japan, being chased by the likes of Brian Nolan. But Lindsay Watson now up to 8, so he's the leading A rider. Richard Barry in there as well. Stephen Edmondson from the B group has managed to attach himself to this group, but that group huddling together is about to make the junction with the rest of the riders, and it's going to be up to the leading A riders, I think, to contest the wins. Not yet absolutely certain, but looking increasingly likely as they hoover up the remaining riders from the D group. And we've still got just a smidgen under 2 kilometers of racing remaining, about 300 meters between the remaining riders, and it's down to just 4 riders up front who are trying to hang on clear of the leading A riders, including we're going to call it the Richard Barry Lindsay Watson group.
Yeah, it's again coming down to the final kilometre here, incredibly close, but it looks like we're going to see another mass sprint from this chasing group behind. I think they're just going to, the speed is only going to continue to ramp up into this final kilometre, and the gap is so small now that it's going to be very difficult for these leading riders to stay clear.
It's not there yet, though, is it? And we're showing at 1.7 kilometres to go. Is it really that much? That would bring it right up to 33 kilometres in total for the event. And the leading riders they're down to just just a little bit too far, as Dirk Adrichem has decided to show what he's made of and go for glory, and that's always likely to happen at this point. Are they racing to be last man standing? Are they racing for the victory? You don't even think about it, just lay all the watts out on the floor and see what exactly eventuates. And I tell you what, it's worth a shot, isn't it? And this is a bid for glory that could well pay off. Is there any chance that he can possibly hold them off? I'm not exactly sure where this sudden burst of energy and enthusiasm is coming from, but it's impressive stuff.
It certainly is, and I think we're all wishing that the finish line can pop up on our screens just in front of him here now. He's over the 32.2 kilometre mark, so it can't be far to go now, and he's certainly sustaining quite a high tempo here. So certainly he's still has a chance of pulling off a surprise victory, it has to be said.
I would be surprised. It would be very impressive. His heart rate is not showing at the moment for me, so it's not easy to see what the intensity level is at. I can be fairly confident that he's feeling the pinch a little bit. He has been overhauled by the rest of them down to the last 700 metres or so. It's flat chat charging towards the line. Michael Garland, Francois Brunard have also got on terms with Dirk Adrichem up front. Meanwhile, the leading A riders behind still have a little bit of work to do to get involved. So I tell you what, the D's just could well have it between them, or under the kite inside the final knockings of this event. Showing at 359 metres to go on my screen, but I wonder, is it just a little bit more than that? We'll see. He's going to have to push all the way to that finish line.
Yeah, certainly, and I think the time and information I'm getting here isn't exactly accurate, so it's hard to point exactly where the riders are on the course, but no doubt I think all the leading riders now are within the final kilometre, and we're about to see a sprint for the finish, but it'll just be a case of who's going to be in that sprint and who's going to be fighting it out for the win.
Now we're looking at the leading A riders who are starting to jettison the rest, and it's all stretching thin, and it's down to ones and twos. Who's got anything left to push? And indeed, they're through the finish line. I'll tell you what, it was hard to tell, but we do have the conclusion of the event. And who got the win? I think it was Dirk Adrichem that was the first across the line. Not easy to tell, but that little late burst of intensity from Dirk Adrichem has produced the glory here, ahead of Shannon Syme, Michael Garland, Emily Wilkins, Francois Brunard, Joe Burney, Michael Farrell, Peter McLean, I think, might have been first of the A group. We wait. All the riders are now collapsed in a heap on the floor of their gyms and pain caves all over the world. I'm collapsed in a heap here at the commentary box, trying to figure out exactly where the finish line is. Who's got the win? We'll find out in due course, but suffice it to say, Ronan, another fine job done by the handicapper, I think, was the real winner today.
I think you and I perhaps need to figure out the difference between a flamme rouge and a finishing banner, but it was difficult to tell exactly where they were there with the small screens that we have, and then the split screen making that even smaller. But certainly, exciting racing coming in towards the finish there. It was touch and go the whole way, whether or not that D group would be reeled in or not. And it appears as if they have survived. And if that is the case, it'll be an incredible and an impressive result. That we've seen them working fantastically well together from start to finish. And as the old saying goes, teamwork makes the dream work, doesn't it? So unfortunately for the rest of these, there's only one rider that can take away that. Can take away the success, but we'll wait for confirmation of the results, because I think there's a bit of a slight bit of confusion here.
Yeah, they're all crowded around the judge at the finish line, all claiming top 10 positions. We haven't got confirmed results at the moment, so I'm not sure whether we're going to have that between now and the end of the broadcast. Suffice it to say, if you're looking for your official result, wait for a couple of days, wait for zwiftpower.com to make its deliberations and judgments, and Cycling Ireland also will be trawling through the results and working out exactly who was registered for the event and who wasn't, and making the decisions on who is in what position. So we will wait with bated breath, and we'll bait our breath until about Wednesday to find out. Suffice to say, first across the line was Dirk Adrichem, and we'll try and get some biographical information about Dirk, whose wonderful achievement needs to be acknowledged. Fantastic performance from one and all. It's been absolutely thrilling and entertaining stuff, beautifully entertaining and wonderfully played out across the roads of Central Park today in New York. It's been my very great pleasure to bring it to you. I'm Declan Quigley, in the company of Ronan McLaughlin, and from all the team in Scotland and here in Ireland. We will be back for the next, we'll be live in a couple of weeks' time. And we'll have updates and information from all of Cycling Ireland's Zwift online activity in the next week or so. So please do tune in for that. But it's been great to have you with us. Let's goodbye for now.